So, what is the truth about the truth? I'm going to talk about that right after this. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Yoel and so grateful to have you. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about the idea of truth and what it means really, and how it is that I can work on being truthful. And this idea came to me as I was going through various YouTube videos, getting sucked into that YouTube vortex and scrolling through comments and looking at the thumbnails. And it really struck me how many people claim to have the truth. If you look at, if you're looking right now, as you're watching this video, if you look at a thumbnail to the side in one of the suggested videos, you're very likely to see some thumbnail that says the truth about this, or this is the truth. And it's very interesting to me because what does that really mean when we say the truth? Because two people can look at the same circumstances and have a completely different perspective on it. And each of them can say that this is the truth. Okay, so if you want to take an example of politics, you can have right-wing channels and left-wing channels, and the right-wing channels will say the truth about this, and the left-wing channels will speak about the exact same issue, and they're going to say the truth about this. So it can't be that truth is a sort of one size fits all. And when somebody says truth, there's one or the other. One is right and one is wrong. That cannot be the case because everybody's bringing their own perspective to it. Now you can say on the flip side, okay, well, what does that mean? That there's no truth at all, that you can just say and do what you like because there's no idea of truth? So I don't think that's the answer either, as I'm going to get into in this video. But I think it is important to understand, when we use blanket terms like this is the truth, it may be a little deeper than that. And if you really want to strive for being truthful and living truth, then I believe in various ways that I'm going to present in this video, there are ways to do that without sort of falling into that trap of declaring something as the truth. Okay. And I want to mention as well, by the way, if you look at, just to sort of, broaden this idea, if you look at a lot of YouTube comments, especially if you get into the political channels, which I'm not recommending necessarily, but if you're into that, or any sort of channel that's talking about a serious issue, you'll see a lot of comments where, let's say there's a journalist speaking or interviewing somebody will say in the comments like, this guy speaks the truth. He's honest because ... And really what that person is saying is, I view it as the truth because it aligns with how I perceive things to be. Okay, so that's, the commentary, the thumbnails of YouTube really got me thinking about that. So something else I wanted to mention, I keep adding to this, but I'm just kind of spitballing here as the ideas come to me. A lot of, as there's a proliferation of YouTube videos, as the internet continues to expand and there's more and more videos and more people are viewing, I find it interesting that there's been this trend of wanting to catch people's attention by saying that this is the truth. And people get to that. And again, if it aligns with what they're thinking, they're going to say, yeah, this channel is speaking the truth. But again, if you kind of take a step back and analyze it from an objective perspective, it's really kind of a misnomer to make declarations that this is the truth per se. Okay. And same for journalists. One of the journalists was interviewing somebody on a channel I was watching, and basically what the journalist, the person who was being interviewed said, look, you brought me on your show, you're cutting me off every time I try and talk. If you want to hear what I have to say, then let me finish what I'm saying. And the journalist is like, well, no, it's my job to do this, and ... And there's all sorts of examples of journalists like that. Okay, one that comes to mind is Mehdi Hassan, for example. I've watched some of his videos, and he really, in my opinion, acts more as a defense attorney than a journalist. But he would tell you, well, no, I'm trying to get at the truth. But again, you have to ask yourself, well, what's his agenda here? He's asking questions where he's trying to elicit certain responses, and particularly when the person he's interviewing is going in a direction that he doesn't want them to go in, he'll cut them off. And when the interviewee says, well, you're cutting me off, you're not letting me finish, he'll say something like, well, I'm just trying to get at the truth here. And again, it's kind of an absurd notion when you think about that, because what this person who's being interviewed will say is the truth is different than what Mehdi Hassan says is the truth. And the viewers who are watching, many of whom will, probably most of them, if you're watching the channel, I'm not one of them, but most of them, if you're watching the channel, will say, well, yeah, Mehdi Hassan is speaking the truth. But many of them too, if you read the comments and whatnot, will say, no, the person he's interviewing is saying the truth. Okay, so all of this together kind of got me into this idea of let's discuss, what it really means when we say truth, or more importantly, how can I sort of kind of cut across all this and try and live my life in a more conscious way such that I am living according to truth. Okay, so I jotted down some notes here that I'll be looking at, just to sort of help you and help all of us really. And I say you, I mean myself as well. These are ideas that I feel are very worthwhile to implement for anybody, just to sort of ask yourself, am I actually seeking out what I view as to be truthful in the circumstances? And actually, that's really the first point. In other words, it's really to get away from the idea of proclaiming, saying that this is the truth, okay, as opposed to sort of, how do I view this? What is my take on this? Do I view what I'm doing now, or what I'm seeing now, or how I'm acting now as being truthful? Or am I kind of just justifying, for example, or rationalizing something that I do, and then kind of, in order to make myself feel better about what I'm doing, say that, yeah, this is very truthful. But if you can sort of get away from making those proclamations and asking yourself that question, you're kind of in other words, what you're doing is you're kind of stopping yourself from getting too caught up in something. You're taking a little pause and you're saying, okay, am I doing something that feels truthful right now in the circumstances? Okay, and if you do that, then that will allow you to sort of get away from getting swept up in something and really asking yourself, because I don't know about you, but I know for myself, there's been a lot of times where I've felt very strongly about a certain issue or something that somebody said or somebody did, and then I responded in a certain way, being convinced that it's true. But had I kind of taken a step back and said to myself, well, is it true? Is what this person is saying really true? Then you may not find yourself sharing, having that viewpoint once you kind of take a little break in the action, so to speak. And actually, it's coming to me now. Somebody that really excels in this idea is somebody by the name of Byron Katie. Okay, she's written a New York Times, I think it's a New York Times bestseller. I'm looking on my bookshelf now. Her book is called Loving What Is. I wasn't even actually intending on speaking about her, but it's coming to me now that she really talks about this idea of examining, things, how you look at things and things that you think about. And one of her questions is, she's got a four-part examination process, and one of her questions is it true? Okay, and then even if you're able to say yes, it's true, and you go on to the next part of her questions that she encourages you to ask yourself. The next part is, can you really be certain that it's true? Okay, and oftentimes people who are doing this sort of test that Byron Katie, I don't know if it's a test, it's an exercise, you can say, that she has for her readers. Once they get to that second stage, even at the first stage, even a lot of times people could say, you know what, really, it's not true. But even if you get past that and you're so entrenched in your ways and you're saying, no, it's absolutely true, when you get to that second part and you say, is it, can you be certain that it's true? A lot of people, again, their perceptions start to kind of fade away in that they can get another perspective on things. And by the way, that's not to say that you cannot have an opinion about something, or that your first opinion or perspective is always going to be quote unquote wrong. That's not what I'm saying. The point I'm making is that, I'm just suggesting some, tips and strategies for kind of testing yourself to make sure that how you're thinking about something really does speak to the truth of the matter, to the point of, where you want to get to. Okay, not because you want to go and proclaim having the truth over everybody else, but because you want to live the most truthful life that you can live. Okay, so that's the first strategy I would give, which is to take a step back before you get too caught up in things and start asking yourself questions like that. Is it true? Can I really be certain that it's true? And I think Byron Katie does a wonderful job of making those questions a part of the inquiry that she has for a reader. She calls it the work. Now it's coming to me. That's what she calls as the work. And I would recommend reading her book for anybody who's interested in learning more about Byron Katie's the work. Now, something else that I've jotted down here is the idea of kind of testing out your views with very close friends. Okay, that's not to say that you should delegate your autonomy and your ability to think for yourself to anybody else. No, it's not about that. But I do think it's important to always have that sort of those close advisors around you, to always kind of keep yourself in check, to make sure you're doing, you're being true to yourself, to use a very cliche term. Okay. So, and by the way, I mean, this is a concept that a lot of the great writers and thinkers and scholars have talked about. I'm surely you've heard of the idea of the mastermind. And that's the idea of, in terms of the business perspective, a lot of business leaders or people in a specific business industry or whatnot, getting together with a group of people to jog ideas and bounce things off one another. And that's because there is a sort of power in numbers. So in the case here also, if you want to sort of kind of really feel if you're acting in accordance with, what you value to be true, test it with a really, really good friend. Okay. That doesn't mean go and ask every single person on the street. Have some good friends who you've been able to count to in the past. I definitely know I've got those in my life, which I'm very grateful for. So have those trusted advisors. Okay. And similarly, you can say as well with your therapist. Okay. Now, oftentimes you've got that 1 hour a week and you're paying a lot of money, and there's sort of specific topics you want to talk about, and you can't get to it all. I know that pressure that a lot of us get under when we go to see the therapist and we want to cover certain things. This may not be one of the things you want to talk about, although I think it's very important. If you want to live a very productive, truthful life, it is important to talk about this with your therapist. Okay, so if you could sort of carve out that space where you could run it by your therapist and see what he or she thinks about it, I would put that under the same category as very close friends. Of course, the reason why having good friends is important as well is because you don't always want to wait until the next appointment to go and ask a question. There may be something that's burning in you, your emotions may be high, whatever the case may be. So those friends might be much more accessible than your therapist may be for you. Also a lot less expensive. I don't know about you, but my friends don't charge me to listen to my thoughts and to give me advice when I ask for it. Okay, so those are two ideas that I thought about, and kind of related to the idea of stopping yourself to ask, are you feeling truthful, is the idea of trying to feel the emotion and the energy behind how you're feeling. Okay, a lot of people would say try and feel it in your body. A lot of people are into that. I have to say, I'm not so great in kind of feeling things in my body. I'm more like the kinesthetic type, but not really as, do I feel like this like pain in my throat or my feeling in my chest? I mean, I do that work, but I can't say I love it, to be honest with you. But definitely what I do like to do is I like to do it as part of a meditation, which is to try and get a sense of what is the emotional energy, cropping up or underlying, how I'm looking at something. Okay. So there could be a variety of examples. Okay. You could be somebody, let's say you're divorced and you've got an ex-wife or an ex-husband, and they've said something to you or, texted you about something, and you find what they're saying is to be absolutely untrue. It's false. Okay. Now, again, I'm not saying that necessarily suggesting that it for sure is not false. Maybe you're right. But again, if you kind of want to be, honest with yourself about truth, as interesting as that sounds, then, you can sort of try and get a sense of what you're feeling underneath. So for example, if you find that the resentment is cropping up a lot, that may be a bit of a siren for you, like a warning symbol that, hey, I may not be looking at this with the right lens necessarily. Okay. Again, maybe you are, and maybe it's just the resentment aspect that you have to let go of. In other words, it could be that what this person said to you is completely untrue. Again, if you were to ask this person, they would say it's completely true. Sometimes there are cases where, they may have said like, oh, I said this on such and such date, and you can see they never said that. So certain times it can be clear that it's untrue. And it may be that the work in this case, which we'll talk about in other videos, is, how do I let go of that resentment? Do I have to be angry about it? Of course not. Okay. While accepting the fact that you have those feelings, but I'm getting into a different topic. But the point here is, though, a lot of times if you are feeling that anger, or there are sort of this negative energy underlying it, that may be a clue for you to keep on digging. And I know I've had that experience a lot of times. I've had both experiences where, to this day, for example, if I looked at something as not being true, I do believe, even as I record this video, that it wasn't true. And then I go into the other analysis, which is what are the emotions that I can work to let go of and surrender. But There have been other cases where when I heard something, for example, right away it was like, what? That is completely not true. And then with a little bit of time and doing, an analysis, I wouldn't say I was conscious or mindful of these specific tips that I'm giving you now, but really kind of almost like an automatic process in my mind where I kind of took a step back and started thinking about things more and trying to give it a fair shake. I was able to see that it was what I had initially thought as being so untrue of what the person said or so true in how I'm looking at it. I started to see a different perspective. And all this, by the way, really ties in with the idea of empathy, which I really talk a lot about, because the idea of being empathetic or empathic, whichever the word is, I think both words are right, is to try and put yourself in that other person's perspective. Okay. Because again, if you could say to yourself, this person is saying it and they believe it to be 100% true. So let's try and examine, maybe there's something more to that. And again, even if it comes out that, based on, after doing all this kind of analysis, and by the way, I make it sound like it's like a whole 1 week process. This, with a lot of time and practice, becomes almost instant. But if you can do that and get into that person's shoes, in the very least, even if you don't necessarily see their point of view, you can certainly get a greater understanding of maybe where they're coming from. And that can allow you to let go of those negative emotions that I've talked about. Okay, so that's something that I think is helpful as well, which is to really kind of analyze your emotions underlying your opinion as to whether or not something is true. Something else that I noted down here is, another question you can ask. So, questions are great for eliciting thought and then kind of action resulting from the thought, resulting from that initial question. That's why so many people, so many teachers love the Socratic method. They love to teach by asking questions. Okay. And that's a great way to learn, obviously. I noticed, for example, on Joe Rogan's podcast, he's very into asking questions. He just wants to understand. Okay, sure, he has opinions, and a lot of times he'll state those opinions, but a lot of times he's just trying to learn by asking questions. So that's why I'm a big believer in questions. So a question you can ask yourself is, that what I'm doing, this is more about actions that you're taking that you feel to be truthful. So, this action that I'm taking right now, is it something that I would want somebody to be observing me doing or saying, for example? Or is it something that again, if the answer to that is yes, then that's a good indication that you're really living according to what you believe to be true. But if the answer is, I may be a bit ashamed of that, or like, I may not want this person to know what it is I'm saying now or what it is I'm doing, then that's also another good way to, to assess, how truthful and true to yourself, again, second time I'm using that term, you're being to yourself. Okay. And that's not to say to beat yourself up. If you do find that, it's something you'd prefer not to be not to be acting in a certain way as an example for somebody else. You'd prefer that what you're doing now is not something that somebody would see you do. But it's more to allow you to continue to improve on that, so that, again, in the future, when you're taking actions or when you're saying something, you can ask yourself that question. Again, it becomes more automatic with time. Is this something that I would be proud to stand by if somebody was in the room right now watching me do this or listening to me say this? Okay. And finally, something I jotted down here is the idea of asking yourself, again, another question, are you willing to accept the other point of view if it's proven to be true? Okay, so some people are so entrenched in their viewpoints, again, particularly if you get into politics or whatnot, they can't even entertain the other side's point of view. And a lot of the times the reason is because it threatens, so to speak, their very existence. Because if they were to see a point in what that other person is saying, then that would mean that they would have to radically change everything, or not everything, but the very way in which they're looking at this point of view. And so they would prefer to kind of keep their head buried in the sand, so to speak, or maintain their position and be entrenched in that, rather than entertain the notion that somebody may have something to say that may conflict with their views. I've had this time and again with so many discussions, you want to call it a debate, that I've had with people, not because I'm trying to convince them, but more because I just want them to understand that there could be another perspective. Okay. And I see a lot of times certain people have that ability, and it ties into empathy, by the way. Certain people have that ability to really honestly look at something and ask themselves, would they be willing to accept that and then, live by that standard? A lot of people have that ability, but so many other people they can't even hear in this example, when I've had these discussions, they can't even hear my point of view because it just is too threatening. So if you want to be, more truthful with yourself and really strive for that truth, a great question to ask yourself is, am I willing to entertain the idea of what they're presenting with the implicit understanding that if I feel what they're saying is true after all, then it is something that I can find myself, whatever the case may be, implementing, doing, saying, suggesting, whatever the case is. Okay. The next thing we talked about is, having that sort of mastermind of good friends / therapist that you can bounce your opinion and perspective off of to keep you on the straight and narrow, so to speak, also in terms of your journey of truth. Okay. Surrounding yourself with the right people to be able to ask them. Number 3, we talked about the idea of examining your emotions underlying your perspective and why you think what you think is true or not true, and what is the feeling underneath that idea. And that could sort of give you some signals as to whether or not you're on the right track. The 4th point we talked about was the idea of how comfortable would you be if you were observed manifesting this truth the way you see it? Would you want somebody to see you or to hear what you have to say based on what you view to be true? And the 5th thing we talked about is the idea of being receptive to examining what the other side is saying and being willing to accept that as truth if you see truth in what they're saying, as opposed to closing yourself off by saying, this is the way I've always looked at things, and I don't even care what the other person has to say. But if you really want to get at truth, it's being receptive to being open to what the other person has to say. Then you may have the same conclusions you've always had, but at least you've given it that fair, truthful shake, so to speak. So once again, if you've got anything to add on that, it's a very rich topic. I would love to see your comments, and I hope you did find that discussion helpful, and I look forward to seeing you at the next video. Hey guys, this is your annoying reminder to please hit that subscribe button. You'll be helping me out, and you'll also get notified of the next cool video. And check out the other videos on my channel. There's some great stuff over there, all sorts of topics. Take care.